Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Today to the Sustainability Lab, we're welcoming Alex Antal. Correct me if I got that right. He's with
Antal.
Antal. He's a principal at Regulatory Assistance Project, and Alex is bringing over a decade of experience with energy regulation and policy, including serving as legal advisor and also assistant staff counsel at the Missouri Public Service Commission, and also as associate general counsel at the Division of Energy in the Missouri Department of Economic Development. Alex has a Juris Doctor with a concentration in international law from SLU. At the Regulatory Assistance Project, Alex has been following the new Missouri legislation on electric utility integrated resource planning. So he's going to go over that legislation today and convey to us some opportunities for getting involved with and influencing those plans. So welcome, Alex. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks for the invitation to speak to this group today. Sounds like you all doing really important work. So just a little bit more about the Regulatory Assistance Project. RAP, as we call it, was founded, incorporated in 1993. It's founded by former state public utility wanted to share the information and knowledge that they learned while being commissioners with current commissioners. It was called the Regulatory Assistance Project because they had a 2-year grant and thought that's how long it was gonna be. But here we are over 30 plus years later, still working with state public utility commissioners, their staff, and stakeholders in the regulatory process across the U.S., but also across the globe. REP has designated teams in the U.S., Europe, China, and expanding in India and Southeast Asia as well. So, and we work with regulators, policymakers, stakeholders to work through the energy transition, to promote best practices, to and thought leadership that serves everyone in the public interest. Hitting a cursor on my screen. Here we go. So a little bit more about me. I grew up in South St. Louis County. As Aaron said, I got both my degrees from St. Louis University and spent approximately 11 years in state government, working most of that time at the Missouri Public Service Commission as a staff attorney and as a policy and legal advisor to one of our 5 state public utility commissioners. I also had a 2-year stint as the attorney for the state energy office and intervened in many public service commission cases to advance the governor's energy agenda during that period. A little bit about my sustainability experience, since this is the Sustainability Lab. I live in Columbia, Missouri, and several years ago, I was asked to serve on the mayor's climate action and adaptation task force and helped the city develop its first climate action plan, and was asked back recently to serve on a focus group as the city updates its climate action and adaptation plan. So happy to be working with the city again in that capacity. After that first climate action plan was developed and approved by City Council, I was asked to serve on our municipal electric utilities integrated electric resource and master plan task force. It's a very similar process to the process that we'll be talking about today, that is done by Missouri investor-owned utilities and overseen by the State Public Service Commission. So worked with the city electric utility here in Columbia to integrate the goals of our climate action plan into the utilities' long-term plans. Uh, at a high overview, the shifts that we're talking about, Missouri has had an IRP process by commission rule for over 30 years. However, that rule is promulgated based off the utilities or the commission's general regulatory authority. There was no, and as a result, you know, I I think there weren't as much teeth in the regulations as maybe some current policymakers would like. Largely, it's an informational process where the utility files a long-term plan, historically 20 years, and just to provide transparency to regulators and stakeholders of how they plan to procure enough electrical energy, the customer demand as they project it over that given period. It's mostly a process um, procedure, like did you follow the rules? Did you do the analysis as you were supposed to? Stakeholders can comments, concerns, and um, suggestions on how to improve the process in the future. But no binding commission approved plan for the utility under that old IRP process. That's changed now. Under the legislation that was passed last year, the utility has the opportunity to file a plan and seek commission approval. The time horizon has shifted to 16 years, and it's a higher stakes process. Um, the inspiration, if you will, for Missouri's legislation actually came from Michigan. Michigan had a what we call a contested case IRP process since 2017. And I will admit I was a bit of a skeptic about the changes that were being proposed in the legislation. However, the chair of the Michigan Commission came down for a conference um, a few years ago now. And the thing that he said that really struck me was in the four IRP proceedings that Michigan had since moving to this contested case process, he said all four of them in a settlement agreement. As an attorney, I think settlements are gold. To me, that signals that every stakeholder who um, you know intervened in the proceeding and took an active role got something that they wanted out of the settlement agreement, and um, that you know, if we can get something and we're in control of a settlement agreement as as someone who's represented parties in these types of proceedings, always better than you know gambling when you take a big case like this to the commission and you don't know where they're going to land. So um, with that in mind, I also spoke and I reached out and spoke with the Michigan State Consumer Advocate that's housed in their Attorney General's office. And because I wanted to see what a consumer advocate who had experience thought of the pros and cons of these two different ways of doing it in an electric integrated resource plan. And he said that he generally has been a proponent of the change. And he said, under the old process, the utility would lean on their preferred plan, the plan that they did under the information only process as as if it were approved anyways. So we might as well do a high stakes commission approved process anyways, since that's the way that utility generally treats it. And in my experience in Missouri, that's how our utilities have traditionally thought of their integrated resource plans as well. That they are the plan. They should be treated as such. But historically, they're not approved. So a lot of times we end up fighting about the same things that the utility raised in the IRP process. We just do it a year or two down the road. And I know that's a frustration for the utilities, and I think it's why they came to the table and were willing to give up some of um, their control over their business under this new legislation is because uh, it allows it reduces litigation. It reduces the amount of regulatory compliance that a utility should do, or at least it's designed to hopefully reduce both of those things. So, it's us to this more contested case process. Now, um, the information has been kind of the norm in the United States for roughly 30 years. You know, in the 70s, mid 70s, late early 80s, you had a lot of, well, I should say, in the post-war period, there was a lot of electric demand growth. You think about suburbanization, you think about central AC adoption in homes. There were new electrical appliances coming out. There was steady over year for electric utilities, and perhaps a little naively, they thought this would go on forever. Uh, but we know it didn't. It plateaued in energy crisis, and but there was a lot of generation that was already kind of baked in, if you will, and so we had a glut of electricity generation for decades. I mean, when I started at the commission in 2013, Ameren was still long on electrical generation and sold a lot of power, um, you know, in bilateral contracts or in the mid-continent um, ISO that they're a member of. But this has changed over the last few years as older plants have come up on the retirement dates, and we see this just the last 2 to 3 years. We see this surge in demand from data centers. So I think a lot of Missouri is not the first to move to this contested case process. As I mentioned, Michigan has been doing it since 2017, but Georgia, Colorado, and Nevada all have contested case processes as well. And I cautiously think that it's the direction, it's the next evolution, and commissions, states across the U.S. are going to go to this higher stakes um, IRP process where there's more on the line, but there's more. And more reason to participate, frankly. So, let's start like breaking into the new IRP. Well, so the first part I think is critical for stakeholders, potential stakeholders to know about is the risk assessment of an IRP. There's a lot of inputs that go into an IRP, more than we have time to talk about today. But a couple of the really key ones are what is the utility projecting for gas prices to be over the 16-year planning horizon? Um, you know, nationally, gas is um, one of the largest sources of electrical generation. It's uh, about 40% ish nationally. And you know, while Ameren doesn't have a ton of gas generation, if you look at their most current IRP, that's what they're looking at adding a significant amount of gas powered generation over the time horizon to replace a lot of those retiring coal assets. So there's a lot of fuel risk. I mean, we've seen just this year gas prices go up significantly. That's data from the U.S. That they've gas prices are going up, and they're projecting them to continue to stay high, primarily because of LNG exports. So, and every utility company and their brother is wanting to get in on the data center hype cycle and build new generation to meet that demand. And so everybody's running out to build new gas plants. Um, and yeah, I was just talking with somebody from our state consumer advocate office recently, and yeah, he said, we're looking at prices for gas plants that are like 5 times what we were looking at just a few years ago, just because of that supply and demand curve for these new generation plants. But importantly, there are aspects in the legislation that require the utility and the commission to do look at affordability and reliability against and balance those against, they can't just propose any suite of generation assets they want. They have to balance these competing you know public interest goals. And importantly, while the next year will predominantly be a rulemaking process, um, another new and unique aspect of the updated IRP process is that the commission will lead a scoping phase starting in August of 2027, where um, they will be working with the utility and stakeholders on developing some of the key inputs and um, different scenarios that the utilities, all of Missouri's investor-owned utilities, will have to run in their subsequent IRP filings. So the commission's taking more ownership of what some of the inputs and methodology will be that the utilities will have to model in their subsequent filings, which that's another aspect that is at least inspired by the Michigan legislation. So, as I said, there's kind of a three-step process that's starting later this year. My understanding is that the commission is going to have start a workshop series starting in mid to late April with an in-person meeting to really kind of unveil their staff's draft IRP rules. And then they're contemplating a series of virtual workshops to really unpack the individual parts of that rule to really make sure that everyone uh, understands what the rule is, what to do, how it works, which I think is great that they want to, level set, make sure that everybody has a common understanding of what the draft rule is intended to do, how it's intended to work, rather than going straight to a formal rulemaking where, you know, folks who are more resourced will have the resources to evaluate what the rule uh, does and how it works, and other stakeholders who are less resourced will have less opportunity to truly understand how the rule operates um, before the commission makes any final determinations about the final rule. So, as I said, there's going to be a workshop series starting later this year, and then I'm not don't know exactly when the formal rulemaking will start. I think it'll be 6 or early 2027, because in the legislation, the commission does have a obligation to have final rules in place by August of 2027.
Or,
And in August, yep, go ahead.
are those gonna be open workshops or like me into that,
A little choppy.
watch my camera off for my internet. Here it out.
That I don't know, it's hard, but try to ask your question again.
I was wondering if the workshops you mentioned will be like for the public or do you have to get invited?
I think I understood the question to be is are the workshop sessions open to the public or do you have to be invited? And as you know, state government entity, all meetings have to be public. And I I would hope that the intent would be to broadly advertise the workshop series, because I think it's in the commission's best interest to make sure that everyone who is potentially interested uh, in the new IRP process has a common understanding of what their draft rule uh, does and how it operates. So, as I said, it's first scoping uh, process where they will be working with stakeholders, utilities, to develop the key modeling assumptions, inputs, and scenarios that the utility has to include in their subsequent IRP filings. Something that really hasn't changed all that much is when the utilities file their individual IRPs, there is a window of time when interested stakeholders can intervene into the proceeding. The commission promulgates a notice, usually shortly after the utility files their IRP or application, and you've got that window of time to file an intervention request. Um, there are only there generally speaking, you have to be represented by an attorney to get intervention. There are only very limited cases where folks who don't have an attorney can intervene, and it's usually on an individual capacity, and um, it's not something I would recommend. Um, so there's definitely resources that are required to participate in these government IRP proceedings. And LBNL is the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. They do a lot of research, technical research on regulatory topics as well. They're a great academic source for best practices in the utility space, as well as the other national labs. And yeah, what they have found is, stakeholder engagement is best and is most likely to lead to changes in how the utility models or the inputs that it puts into the model when that's done early. And so, to the extent your local governments that you represent would consider this, I'd consider it, as early as possible. As I said, the workshop series, it's very low stakes. You can just show up, participate. It's low bar of entry, but it's potentially a high influence opportunity because rules don't get changed that often. These will probably be the rules of the road for the next decade or more. So to the extent stakeholders want to have input on what those rules look like, what the rules of the game are going to be for the next decade or more, is a big opportunity. Pardon me. And as I said, scoping, the methodology that utilities use, the inputs are a key driver of what the outputs are going to be. When we get to the actual contested case IRPs, we're arguing about whether or not the utilities did the modeling correctly, um, um, and poking holes in their plans and whether or not to the extent parties have the resources, whether alternative modeling should be adopted by the commission. So it's a higher hurdle to get those changes made. The further along you get involved in the process. Also, a big challenge with IRPs is that a fair amount of utility data, they will mark as proprietary or confidential, particularly when it comes to these large load customers, data centers, reviewing, proceedings like this in other states. Um, it's a challenge to get that proprietary data and confidential information, even if you intervene. I think Missouri's rules around getting parties confidential information are pretty good. And but generally speaking, the sharing of confidential information will be limited to the attorney, and individuals who are actively involved in reviewing the reviewing the IRPs for a particular party. Many times that might be a hired consultant who specializes in this type of work. If you have staff internally that have some knowledge of this, it is possible to get them access, but it is a higher hurdle to show that they are have the expertise to evaluate this because a lot of the utility will argue that there's a lot of proprietary knowledge. If their competitors found out what the pricing was for particular data center customers, they either the customer or the utility or both would lose a competitive advantage. So there's lots of NDAs in these types of proceedings. Um, but the commission has the authority under the legislation to set standards on the what type of software the utilities are going to use. So not every utility can just pick their preferred software, which would make it, more difficult for stakeholders who, um, want to intervene in multiple utilities, IRPs, to 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 analyze the data. And the commission also has the power to standardize how that data is formatted, presented, again, to increase transparency for all stakeholders involved. Another way that I'm hopeful that the Missouri Public Service Commission will make this a better process for all stakeholders is by using third-party facilitators rather than allowing the utility to lead their own meetings. I see that in promise of that in the commission wanting to do a workshop series to level set and educate stakeholders. The fact that the legislation requires the commission to have this initial proceeding where they select common methodologies and inputs for all three of their investor-owned utilities, like that signals to me that they want to have a process that's not completely led by the utility and where it's more collaborative and stakeholders feel like their voice is being heard. And I feel like that's a promising sign that the commission is going to make sure that everybody feels heard and is heard across this process. I've sat in numerous meetings that were utility led, and while um, I don't mean to disparage my friends who work for the utilities. I think there's a general you know, comfort level with when you're leading the meeting, you tend to control the meeting, you control the agenda, and you don't always leave enough time for everyone to feel like they've been heard. And I've seen how that plays when even when the commission's own staff doesn't feel like the utility is giving them an opportunity to be heard, and um, you know you don't feel like you're a shared partner in the process. So I think there are good signals coming from the commission that they're incorporating processes to um, have more of a consulting collaborative process as opposed to a explain and defend process. And this is a best practice. It's used in numerous states, but Hawaii and Minnesota are two big call outs. Georgia, as I said, it has a contested case process as well. It's more of a staff-led process, which is the commission in Missouri has used in the past, and I think it works. It works well, but I also think that you know, staff has a lot on its plate as well, and isn't doesn't necessarily always have the capacity to be the best facilitator. Um, and not that they don't have the capabilities, but it's just a capacity issue. So this is a case study that I really excited to share with all of you. As I mentioned, Georgia has a contested case IRP process. And just last year, Georgia Power had their triannual IRP. And for the first time, um, a group of four uh, local governments banded together to intervene as a coalition in Georgia Power's IRP process to represent the interests of their residents, um, and focusing on resiliency and customer protection and sustainability as well. Um, and I think there's value in these types of coalitions. Um, they can say as a collective group that they represent a significant portion of the utilities customers, and they can pool resources because, as I said, you have to hire legal counsel. More likely than not, you have to hire experts, subject matter experts, to prepare testimony on these utility filings. So one of the victories that the Georgia coalition had was on solar plus storage, storage pilot program. So, this was not part of the utility's original filing, but they were able to successfully negotiate, um, you know, this program, and well, I take that back. This was an existing program, but they were able to expand eligibility to include, municipalities, universities, schools, churches, and hospitals. Um, and the program initially was not going to let the batteries that the distributed batteries that these customers had to charge off the grid. They were only going to be able to charge off of the solar that they had on site. Um, but they argued that the resiliency would there would be additional resiliency benefit both to the customer and the utility as a whole, if these batteries were able to charge on off the grid. So you can charge your battery to the extent you need it during daylight hours. Um, you know, time of use rates are not mandatory in Georgia, but if I had a solar plus storage um, on my business or organization's building, it would likely be on a time of use rate. You would discharge it during the evening, when utility rates are generally higher under a time of use framework. But then, as this program now allows customers to do, they can charge it overnight, typically when demand for electricity is lowest, and they'd have that power for. There's usually particularly in the winter, but you'll have an early morning peak when people are getting up, getting ready for work, school, and there's a value to discharge that battery at least partially during the morning hours, before you can then charge it during daylight hours again to top it off. Not to mention the resilience value of, if the power goes out, having that battery on site to help maintain electricity for the essential functions that all of these entities do, like providing healthcare and education and essential government services. The other victory that they had was on data access and renewing an automated benchmarking process. As I understand it, the commercial building benchmarking tool was set to expire, but they successfully advocated for the continuation of that tool, so that uh, commercial buildings could meet local efficiency ordinances more easily than if they had to go back to more of an archaic process. I know that's uh, local benchmarking of commercial buildings and other buildings is something that a lot of local governments are interested in, and can be a valuable tool to help um, increase building efficiency in a community. But I wanted to highlight that they didn't get everything that they asked for. You rarely ever do in these utility proceedings. One of the asks that the Georgia Coalition had was for Georgia Power to stand up a virtual power plant program. Essentially, a virtual power plant is a fancy name, trendy name for a demand response program that aggregates um, customer efficiency as well as distributed energy resources. And when rather than building, say, a natural gas peaker plant, when there's a critical need for power, say on a hot summer day, the utility through the virtual power plants program can call on participating customers to um, export their more generation to the grid, to cut back on discretionary electric usage, um, because those resources are less expensive than building a new plant that is really designed to only run like a handful of hours a year on those really hot or really cold days when you have really high demand for critical need for electricity. And then you know the other 90+% of the year they just sit idle. Um, just not a well utilized resource. Um, but they were unsuccessful in achieving this goal. Um, but as I said, you never get everything that you want, but hopefully you get what you need. And who knows? Maybe in a future proceeding, they'll push for this again. So I think there's a lot of parallels that this organization, this group of local communities could take from this case study. Um, with SB4's requirements and um, really the incentive it creates for utilities to get a commission approved IRP. There's a lot of incentive for the utility to, I think, work with stakeholders, work with parties who intervene, um, to find a mutual agreement, hopefully like I was explaining in Michigan, has been kind of the pattern since they've moved to this model, um, because there's uncertainty even for the utility if they go to a commission proceeding and it gets fully litigated. I'm hopeful that Missouri's utilities will want to work with parties in their IRP proceedings to try to find that mutual ground, and come to a settlement agreement, um, because there's a lot of value for them to get this commission approved plan and um, yeah, not stretch it out and have it go to Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, and it can drag out. Yeah, even under this streamlined process, the process just streamlines the administrative um, government process, not the full judicial process if people want to avail themselves of it. Again, both states, both utilities, or the utilities in both states are all courting this large load growth. Um, I know from reviewing Missouri filings and Georgia filings that you know both the utilities want to build these new power plants for these data centers. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of profit on the line for them in attracting these data centers, and so and there's a lot of policymakers in both states I think at certainly the state, and I think at in some local government levels that see the economic development value of data centers. Um, and so, I think that some of the forecasts might be a little overblown, but it's not, it's not, it's some of them are going, are going to show up. And um, I think I mean, it's definitely real. It's happening. Putting a lot of a lot of strain on the traditional process. And I think this is a perfect organization, regional collaborative to make this case study too. You all are already talking to one another about shared goals around health and sustainability and uh, local economic development. So I think getting everybody in the same room is you've already got the first step down. Um, so it's kind of segueing into some additional parts of the presentation that I have, and we can pause for questions on the IRP process. But I just wanted to take a moment to um, kind of wrap the IRP innovate process up right now. I do have some more slides on the large load aspects of SB4 as well as um, construction work in progress. But yeah, just want to pause here and see if there's any questions on IRP processes.
Can't hear you.
Still can't hear you.
I can't.
I'm unplugging some things.
There you go. Here. Uh-oh.
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you
Okay. To be a intervener, do you have to be like it sounded like when the cities in Georgia decided to intervene, they hired a lawyer and formed an official coalition. Is that necessary? Do you have to be like an official intervener, or is it going to be like a public process where anybody in an organization can show up and give input?
So for the workshop series, anybody can show up. For the rulemaking process, anybody can show up.
Okay.
For the, I'm not entirely sure on the scoping process, but definitely for the individual investor-owned utility IRP filings, you have to be a formal intervener
Okay.
to weigh in.
Okay.
Yep.
The other Aaron, you came off mute. Did you have a question?
Well, that was just to say, I mean, there's just a few of us here, so I thought I would come off mute. Yeah, I'm still in my learning phases about how these processes work, and I'm only really engaged. I'm doing decarbonization projects for individual buildings, and so I've started needing to read and understand the Ameren, Missouri's IRP, and I found it insufficient in several regards. So I don't know. I'm an energy auditor at the building level and
Sure.
kind of involved with some of the local legislation around building energy standards. But the state level stuff is a stretch for me. I'm starting to understand it. So that's why I'm here. So when you know, when you're talking about points where we could intervene, I mean, the city of St. Louis has commitments toward net zero that are impossible to make without Ameren reaching its goals. And the way they're defining their goals um, isn't plausible to me. They call natural gas after 2038 carbon free, and it's like, well, that's not that's hopeful, maybe if but it's kind of it's like a it's uh, it's pinning a lot of hope on unknown magical future technologies, and
Yes.
that
Yeah. So I've scanned Ameren's most recent IRP, Um, so I will make some comments about IRPs in general, about where the potential opportunity, where the opportunity is to make critiques. Um, One big critique area is the utilities load forecast. And that the load forecast is um, how they project demand increasing, decreasing, staying the same over the time horizon, in this case, 16 years. Historically, electric utilities in the US have been very optimistic about increasing demand, growing year over year, as I commented, kind of a historical example. But even the last 20 years, where there has been relatively little demand growth for electricity, um, a lot of the projections still show growth.
yeah, there's a graph I think that was in their latest, like their 2025 update that just showed their historical projections.
Yep,
It was comical. It was like each time it was like up, 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 and then they showed the actual. It was like,
exactly. Yeah, I know the exact graph you're talking
I
about.
was surprised they put it in there because, I mean, were they required to put it in there? It was kind of embarrassing for them.
You know, I don't know that there's a specific requirement. There may be, but it's not uncommon. Like I've seen those types of graphs in multiple uh, electric utility IRP filings.
Mhm.
Like this is just like the norm in the industry, and
It's like you're like, here's our projection.
yeah,
And then you're like, historically, our projections,
yeah.
these are our projections. It's like,
Um,
I don't think we can trust your new projection then.
I
No.
think I think there's a tendency to have a short memory and
Mhm.
focus on the future forecast and not on what the history has shown us to be true.
Mhm.
Um,
So,
so I
so
think there's an opportunity there to challenge any electric utilities load forecast. Not saying anything in particular about Ameren's current one. I'm just saying like this is a trend, an industry trend.
well,
They have a financial incentive to be overly optimistic.
yeah, I mean, I can understand it just gives you more flexibility if you've told everybody to expect an increase, then you can do something about it. But I don't. So, I mean, my primary worry is climate change, and so I mean, part of my reluctance to engage at the state level is just the perceived pointlessness of engaging with a a Republican-dominated commission that it's the party is in denial about climate change in general. So I think that's part of my reluctance to engage is just how fruitful is that going to be? But I think another piece that I saw, and I actually talked to the primary author of the 2023 IRP about at the time I'm very in green circles, so everybody's talking about electrification, electrification, And I'm looking at the IRP and being concerned about electrification because it's still very carbon intensive here. And and then I noted that their load growth didn't account for electrification of heating. And so I'm just like, well, don't if we're trying to electrify, we need to clean the grid, but also we need to plan for increased electrical load growth, and it wasn't there. And so Matt, so his name is also Michaels. Matt Michaels at Ameren said they punted to I'm forgetting the acronym. Morgan moved there, Aaron. She
Oh, I'm not blanking too.
it's a nonprofit that consults for utilities and does a lot of their projections. It starts with an I. What is it? Doesn't it start with an I? I-E, maybe. No, I don't know.
Is it EPRI?
Anyway, what?
EPRI?
Yeah,
EPRI, yeah,
Pepper.
that's it.
Um, yeah, so I guess like but what we could be able to do is try to get the city and the county to get together to have somebody advocate for more renewables rather than the natural gas. I mean, because renewables and batteries are very cost competitive internationally. And I think by the time, like they're talking about adding a lot of natural gas, shortly. And I don't know if that's going to be the cost competitive thing to do at that point. So I don't know. Would it be, but the proper way to do it would be to get city and county together to um,
Yeah, I
send
think
somebody to advocate for that. Is that the right? Is that to say like let's
that's
not consider another piece that it's moved to one thing I liked about the old plan was that it was out to 2045, and now it's a much shorter plan. So I don't know. There's good and bad to that, right?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's I mean, the farther you go out, the more uncertain things are. I don't know that 16 versus 20 makes a whole lot of difference, but it also, I think it's just an administrative balancing because they're going to do these. Each utility is going to be required to do one every 4 years. So, I mean, the commission's going to lead a process, a modeling process in year one. If I had to guess based off of just historical practice. You're going to have Ameren, Evergy, and then Liberty Empire, in subsequent years. Um, I could be off on who's going to go first and versus second, but I think and then they're just going to repeat the process, um, cycle after cycle. Um, you know, in addition to critiquing the load forecast, um, I will say that, like with the Georgia example, you know, I didn't say that they led with climate change arguments. I know that that's something that they care about, but they framed their arguments uh, around resiliency, around customer affordability, um, and you know, I think there are other because as you said, like renewables are very cost competitive. Storage is very cost competitive um, to these more traditional supply side resources that are in basically every investor-owned utilities IRP these days. I mean, over like the decade plus that I was at working in state government, I think the only thing that they built were renewables, um, and they retired some coal. They still got a lot more coal on their books. And, I think policymakers at the state level have taken more of an interest in what utilities are building than they were a few years ago. Um, but my understanding of the legislation is that it says no more, they have to build enough uh, dispatchable, reliable generation to before they retire, an existing coal plant. But like 80% of the capacity of that retiring coal plant has to be met by uh, basically non-renewable sources, non-renewable, intermittent renewable sources. But it doesn't say it has to be 20, like the other 20% has to be renewable. So I think there is an opportunity to be like, hey, we know you have to, there's as much as 20% on the table, but there's no guarantee that you're going to get 20% renewable. Um,
It says dispatchable, or it says it has to be fossil.
it doesn't say it has to be fossil, I don't believe. I think nuclear would qualify.
But dispatch, so nuclear, what is the actual language you use? Like a battery storage wouldn't count, like utility scale battery.
I'd have to go look at the statute closer, but my reading was that 80% of the generation, 80% of the capacity that's being retired has to be replaced with a reliable, aka non-wind or solar resource.
Well, I mean, reliable, that could be bad, like battery. But you don't need 80% capacity as a battery. Hmm. Interesting. Okay. Well,
And the other thing I would say is, while this is, and the way that I frame this is uh, around the supply side resources. Um, Historically, the old, traditional IRP process, and um, I imagine the new process will include this as well in the rules. Utility has to include demand side resources in the portfolio of resources that are going to be used to serve customers. So, and I know, the commission took a significant cut to all of Missouri's utility run energy efficiency programs in the last couple of years. You know, advocating for more energy efficiency programs is something that stakeholders can push for. Um, and I would say that, you know, while while the types of resources, whether the supply or demand, is the focus of the IRP process, when it comes to settlement agreements at the Public Service Commission or any public service commission in the US, when you're in a settlement room, anything's on the table, even if that's a commitment to propose something in a subsequent rate case that might not necessarily be the subject matter of an IRP. If there's something of value um, that the utility has some control over in a different type of proceeding, um, any type of commitment can be made in a settlement agreement that couldn't necessarily be, the commission couldn't necessarily approve in like a contested hearing. So I said there's more options about horse trading when it comes to settlement agreements. They're not just defined to the the subject matter of the proceeding, like generation resources.
where was that 80% reliable power? Where would I look that up?
I don't know that I have a citation in my slides, but I'll find the citation, and I'll put it in my email to to the other Aaron when I send over my PDFs.
Okay, thanks.
Um, oh, we're almost at time.
Yeah,
Um,
can you cover large load really quick?
um, yeah, I'll do it really quick. So the legislation puts a requirements on Ameren and Evergy to develop large load tariffs um, for customers that have a projected peak demand of 100 megawatts um, annually. But recent settlement in Ameren proceeding, the commission lowered the floor to 75 megawatts, looking at the monthly maximum demand. Um, they found that a lot of data centers uh, would fall in that kind of like 80 megawatt to 100 megawatt range and didn't want to lose the protections that um, are inherent in these large load tariffs for those slightly smaller but still significant customer loads. Um, so, you know, the way I like to approach this is like, let's compare this to, kind of the status quo today. So I created this chart, um, to compare kind of your standard large primary service customer to these new large load tariff customers. Um, contract, kind of the standard contract length is significantly longer. Um, you know, generally, the minimum bill is significantly larger as well. The for the term of these contracts, the data centers, large load customers are going to get charged for 80% of their contracted capacity, whether they use it or not. Um, so if it's, you know, they're contracted for 100 megawatts, they're going to they're going to pay for 80 megawatts, no matter whether they use, 75 or 50 or what have you for that contract length. Um, there's they're going to pick up more of the tab for grid costs to connect those large loads than a standard large customer. And I guess one benefit that the data centers and other large load customers will have is they have more access to or direct access to renewable energy that they procure on their own. Um, you know, you know, Other customers, if you want to, you either have to develop, yourself behind the meter, or you have to go through the utility through, one of the utility programs to get renewable energy. It's not like that in every state, but that's the way it's been in Missouri. So, to the extent these large load customers have, 100% renewable or 100% clean, um, goals, they can they have the flexibility to procure that renewable energy, um, basically go around Ameren or another Missouri utility to procure that.
So the benefit that could be a benefit in that they're asking for less capacity or they're asking for less power from our grid. And that's good because we're going to be carbon based for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, yeah. To the extent they hold themselves to their own commitments, and
But if they want to contract with Ameren for 100 megawatts, but they say, oh, maybe we could get 50 of that from renewable from somewhere else. They could lower that guaranteed price to 50 megawatts instead of 100 megawatts from Ameren.
I think, I think the likely scenario is they sign a contract for say 12 years and they say, hey, we need 100 megawatts. We don't care where it comes from, but we need 100 megawatts. And then over the 12-year period, they're working to procure renewables either from the utility or from other third-party sources. And when that 12-year term is up on their contract, they're going to be like, hey, we don't need as much of your dirty energy anymore.
Okay.
And then, you know, the rest of the customer base is left with, I think, picking up the tab.
Yeah. Because also what my question was, this is about the cost of power and then the substations, but the capacity or the demand that they're adding to our system that they're filling with gas plants, we're paying for that, right? It's not them. They distribute that to the new power plants to all the customers. So we are paying for or going to pay for additional generation for data centers.
I think a lot of commissions across the country are grappling with um, this problem of how do you balance the desire to have economic development in your state, um, bringing in more business, more GDP via these data centers and other large loads, and protect existing customers um, from the potential downfalls if these data centers don't use as much energy as they say they are going to, or uh, don't materialize, like they just never show up because somebody gave them a better deal in the next state over.
Mhm.
And that's where you're seeing these longer contract lengths, like one from like 5 years to over a decade, and these minimum bills, and picking up at least the interconnection costs. But you're right, like these gas plants and all of the supply side resources um, that the utilities are proposing in their IRPs, these assets last multiple decades. I mean, we're talking 30, 40, 50 years. Um, so to the extent, one concern that I have is, you know, when these initial contract lengths are up, are they going to still want all of this power? And the um, there are significant collateral that used to large load customers have to put up front. Like we're talking 2 years of minimum bills up front. Um, well, that's just 2 years again for assets that last multiple decades.
Mhm.
So yes, there is incrementally more protection for customers. Um, the historical example that I've brought up multiple times to Ameren and to others is the Noranda aluminum smelter that used to be, was down in the Boot Heel, Missouri Boot Heel. Um, that aluminum smelter represented 10% of Ameren's total load when it was up and running at full capacity.
Um,
That thing, it it went offline during an ice storm, and the demand just evaporated for a long time because when the smelter lines, you know, uh, go from liquid to solid, they're not. It's not a quick thing to fix.
mm.
So they lost a lot of demand overnight, and um, yeah, there were a lot of proceedings, like utility still wanted its money. Um, and then when Noranda fell on hard financial times, they were arguing they needed a more attractive electricity rate. And Emmer didn't wasn't in favor of it. But the argument was from an economic development perspective is do we charge all other customers a little bit more to keep this aluminum smelter up and running in Missouri? And ultimately it didn't matter. They gave Noranda a little bit better of a rate, but not as much as they wanted, and they ended up folding anyways. And the rates went up because utility still has a revenue requirement, and they want to get paid.
Yeah.
So yes, there are incremental more protections than there has been historically, but you're not 100% protected.
Okay. Well, we have come to the end of our time. I would like to thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.